Hey, what's up everybody? It's Andy from CleanSwifter.com, and I'm here to show you another video in my series covering Martin Fowler's book, Refactoring, Improving the Design of Existing Code. Each week I post a different video that shows you an example of the refactoring in Swift 3, and this week we're going to look at a refactoring called Remove Assignment to Parameter. Now, this is an interesting refactoring because technically the smell that this refactoring fixes isn't even possible to do in Swift 3. I was actually debating on not even doing a video to cover it. But what's interesting though is that the change from Swift 2 to Swift 3 is actually what prevents this smell from happening. So long story short, if you continue writing your Swift 2 code, it is possible to run into the smell that this refactoring fixes. But in Swift 3, it's actually preventable by the compiler. The other thing I want to bring up is that I want to show you that this is the reason that Martin Fowler presents this refactoring is primarily to resolve issues of clarity when looking at methods, wondering whether objects, the parameters are being passed in by value or by reference. And again, I want to clear that up for how Swift works and show you through example how the parameters are handled. And again, it varies from Swift 2 to Swift 3. The overview of this refactoring is essentially that if you have a method where you're passing parameters to that method and you see code that then assigns new values to those parameters, that's what you want to then introduce a temporary variable to use instead of assigning new values to the parameters. Essentially, parameters when passed to a method should be treated like they're final. Like there shouldn't ever be anything modifying the values of those parameters. Now, you can of course call mutating behavior on the object being passed in, but never actually change the assignment of that object itself that is represented by the parameter. Now again, that can be a reference type or it can also be a value type, and both have the same rules in Swift 3. So let's take a look at this refactoring. So here we have a class, and this is actually a name formatter. And right now, all it has right now is a function that formats a name provided two strings, the first and last name. And you can see in the documentation that the method's intended to provide the format of last name, comma, first name. So right off the bat, this is the smelly version of this code, where last name is attempted to be is passed in as a parameter here, and then it's immediately assigned to with a new value. So you may be looking at this and thinking you never write this in your code, but trust me, you'll see code where this happens. So essentially what this is doing is it's modifying the value of last name by appending a comma with a space, and then returning that last name with the first name, and then it'd be in this format. So if you're coming from Swift 2, you might have seen code that looks like this. What this does is this is essentially telling the compiler that when last name can be changed, is that it's not a constant in the scope of this method. Now you can see in Swift 3, which I'm writing in this playground, is that the compiler won't even allow me to do this. So for instance, if you end up Googling, in which you might see a Stack Overflow answer saying how do I create mutable versions of parameters in Swift, you'll find answers just saying put a var here. And of course this worked in Swift 2, it does not work in Swift 3. Now if you do put this back here, and the compiler will actually tell you that parameters may not have the var specifier, and it even gives you a quick fix replacement in which a temporary variable for last name is created here and then used just like how we had done it in the prior implementation of the method. That in fact is the refactoring remove assignment to parameter. Now you might be telling yourself, well, strings, they're classes, so they're going to be reference types in Swift. What about value types? Well, let's create a struct and see if the behavior is any different, because normally I'd think, all right, if I'm passing a value type in here, I have no guarantees that that thing is going to be final, and I would suspect that it could be changed any time. So instead, let's try it out. Let's create a struct representing name, and name has a first name, and name has a last name. And let's create a new version of the same method, full name, which takes a name from our struct and similarly returns a string. Now, just Just make the compiler happy at this point. We're going to return an empty string. But the first thing let's do here is let's see if we can assign a new value to name. And we can't as well, because by default, whether it is a struct or a class, value type or reference type, the methods in Swift are final and only final. That is Swift. That is a new Swift 3 feature. So similarly, the fix here would be to create a new temporary variable and then continue on using that temporary variable name. So there you have it. That's the remove assignment to parameter refactoring in Swift 3. Now remember, technically in Swift 3, you'll never find yourself in a spot where you actually have to perform that refactoring because the compiler won't let you get there. Method parameters in Swift 3 are going to be final always and ever, unlike Swift 2 where you could use the var keyword in order to make the parameter mutable. So remember, if you're Googling and you find a Stack Overflow answer or other old dated material that tells you use a var specifier in order to add mutability to parameter, don't believe it and realize that that is a Swift 2 convention, no longer possible in Swift 3. So feel good that if you're writing Swift 3 and beyond, you won't actually have to run into this. And if you do run into it, remember, this is why it goes back to the clarity around needing to remember whether that parameter being passed in is going to be passed in by value or by reference. Because by reference, if you change it, that means you're changing it everywhere, which is obviously a bad thing because you want that locally scope understanding of what's changing when you make assignments. I hope you enjoyed this video from CleanSwifter.com series on refactoring, covering different refactoring each week from Martin Fowler's book, Refactoring, Improving the Design of Existing Code. You can buy that book in the description for this video using my Amazon affiliate link. I'll see you next week. Happy cleaning.